So welcome everyone. I'm Celia, the curator of Parasite, curator of the show as well. And next to me is Philippe, director of Parasite. And we are really honored today to have the artist duo, Lien and Enzo Camacho, joining us today for the opening of the exhibition, offerings for Escalante. And for today's conversation, we really wanted to take this opportunity to unpack about the artistic practice of the artist duo, and also talking more about the details and the process in making the show as well. And so to start with, just a general background information about the artist. Enzo Camacho is from the Philippines, currently based in Berlin, and Amy is a Taiwanese American, currently based in New York City. They have been collaborating since 2009 for over a decade of time already. And previously, their artistic practice and project has been always evolving a lot about the labor and social event and rights across different space. And particularly in the Philippines, they have been doing research for in the past since 2017 as well, particularly for this project. So very often, they would like to address this localized kind of alteration of labor and social economic issues in different regions, and see how it connect to other site and space as well. So for this exhibition, offerings for Escalante, definitely from the title of it, you already know that it is dedicated to the town Escalante. Just a little background about it is the northern provenance of the Negros region in the Philippines, and Negros is the most biggest, over 60% of sugar production in the region, and it is well known as the sugar bowl of the Philippines. So they have been at the region and doing a lot of research and getting to know about the sugar plantation kind of social structure in the region and its impact to the people in the Philippines, and also how it impact to other site, other regions as well in Hong Kong and further. So without further ado, I would like to first really unpack about this research process, because you guys have been started this process in 2017. It would be really interesting, I guess, to let the audience know more about maybe your first encounter and what challenges or things that you have learned throughout the research process and how you started this project together.
We always have to check who's gonna who's gonna address the question. Thank you, Celia. That was a great overview of the practice. Yeah, I guess just to give a little bit of background into the research that this whole show, and that actually a significant amount of our recent work has come out of. That, as Celia mentioned, is based in this island called Negros, which is also where my mother is from. So Negros, I've been visiting as a child, of course, to see family, but we both first visited there together in 2017. And actually, initially, the entry point for us was more artistic in character, I guess, but it was to study a very interesting and quite famous, at least locally, mural painted by a queer Filipino-American artist, Alfonso Osorio. Maybe some of you had a chance to see some of his works at the show in Tycoon recently. So initially, we really came to Negros because we were artists and we were interested in this very interesting painting, which was a mural called The Angry Christ. It's basically in the workers' chapel of an industrial sugar mill in Negros, in the Victoria's milling company. And so the idea from the beginning was to go and study this painting and try to put it in relation to the context that it's embedded in, which of course is the context of the plantation. And so that was the kind of starting point, in a way, of this engagement that now has lasted several years and that is ongoing. I think it's almost uncomfortable to call it a project, because it feels like beyond a project at this point. It's just an ongoing engagement of ours. And I think from that moment, when we started researching the painting in 2017, we started visiting every year to research the context that this painting is in, I think that the direction of the project, I'm calling it project again, the direction of the engagement or the heart of the engagement started to shift a little bit away from the painting specifically into really understanding the plantation or the hacienda context, as we call it in the Philippines. And so that became much more, a much bigger part of the project. And I think when you start researching the plantation in the Philippines, immediately it's almost like getting sucked into a really violent, there's no way to avoid the ongoing violence that the hacienda system in the Philippines produces because of the social conditions in the Philippines, the colonial history, the imperial present of the Philippines. The hacienda system really, and then not, of course, just in the Philippines, plantations everywhere have always been sites of violence wherever they have appeared globally. But for us, it was really interesting, I think, to start by sort of looking at this painting, and then very quickly sort of shifting our attention really to both the oppression of the plantation system, but also the forms of people's resistance, and that really has become a big part of the project and the work now.
It's also interesting. I think it's interesting also that this is the first time you presented your work in a solo institutional context in Asia. And for the benefit of the audience as well, maybe Amy, you could talk a bit about how you work as an artist duo, and kind of following on from Enzo. So how does one approach such a complex kind of context as well, and the kind of different methodologies, maybe especially from the initial beginning stages of learning about Negros?
It's a lot in that question. I mean, our practice, we actually met in university in the US, and we started working together, I guess, in like college art class. But then like the summer I graduated, actually our first institutional solo show is at Green Papaya Gallery in Manila in 2009, our first art show ever. And that was also, the sort of awakening of this really, what was to become like a really rich collaborative practice between us. And I would say, my family is from Taiwan. And I was born and grew up in the U.S. And I think this first trip to the Philippines was really like deeply destabilizing in a lot of ways. I think, it's always a little bit hard to explain, and I didn't even quite understand what was happening until like way later. But there's, I think as an Asian American, I never really identified with being an American in many ways, but then going to the Philippines and understanding the kind of infrastructure that doesn't work, that is a result of many colonial and particularly American imperial subjugation, just really sort of awakened me to like how the world really works. I think both Enzo and I had a lot of revelations that summer working on that show, and I think we were always sort of relating to each other as these kind of diasporic, kind of global citizens in a way. And then the Philippines became this really kind of important lens through which to view global relations in general. So then I think our early collaboration actually evolved out of these kind of like transnational conversations when Enzo moved back to Manila and I moved to New York, but we were still sort of like checking in with each other and sharing our experiences from both sides. And then, it's a really long story. I would just answer that part of your question and say,
Maybe like continue with like that from Enzo kind of unpacking from the 2017 like deep dive into the mural kind of painting, and then through the engagement with the community, like the ongoing understanding of the context of the land reform, or like the struggle that the local people are facing at the present. Like you guys started to meet up with more community members, and then engagement, and then even doing workshop with the local kind of children, and so like these like slowly evolving kind of practice to be more community based, and slowly turning your kind of focus into Escalante massacre. Like maybe do you want to share a little bit more about that route, how you ended up at the Escalante massacre, and how do you find why you feel the urgency now to really make this record out of this historical kind of very heavily context?
That's a really, I think, important question in terms of contextualizing the show. Because, as I said earlier, also, once you, as I said, once you start really trying to research the plantation, you always come up to violence. Like, that's always the bottom line of the plantation. And so when we began this research in 2017, there was kind of a turning point moment for us, actually, because we began very innocent. As I said, at first we were just artists. We were interested in looking at this painting in relation to the plantation. It seemed like an intellectually stimulating project. But then in 2018, and actually I do want to mention this because today is the anniversary of this event. On October 20, 2018, a group of farmers who were engaged in this practice, we may talk a little bit about this later, but this practice called bungkalan, where they tried to grow food on land that is not being used in order to be able to eat, first and foremost. But it's a movement, it's a form of protest, it's a form of growing food, it's a form of just, just building community. But it's one that's been heavily suppressed by, private landowners for one, and the government that is attached to the private landowners. So in 2018, on October 20 today, one of these sites was ambushed by a team of gunmen. 9 farmers were killed. A few weeks after that, the lawyer who was working with the families on that case was also assassinated in broad daylight. And that for us, when we started this research, was really one of those moments when we really had to reflect what it was we were researching and what it meant to research a situation like this, and what the real reality of the situation is. And I think after that point, we couldn't deal with it anymore as sort of artists who were just interested in this topic, but we really had to kind of make a few firmer decisions about how to continue and whether we were ready to continue this work, because it was at a level of level of intensity that at least at the beginning we hadn't anticipated. So that's all to say, I think that moment was really formative for us, and so it's also very meaningful to be able to have this opening today on the anniversary of the Sagay massacre. But in a way, to go back to the question of why Escalante, actually when we started working on the film and this show in general, at the beginning it was really to address the present day violence, because the violence is continuing, there are killings happening very regularly, it's a really disturbing and urgent situation in Negros, all over the Philippines, but in Negros in particular, because it is a plantation zone. So initially, we really wanted to speak about the violence that is happening in the present, but these things are really difficult, even security-wise, to speak about, because of the militarization of the countryside in the Philippines. Starting to ask questions, for example, about the Sagay massacre, you have to be a bit careful. When you're there. And so we thought about that for a while, and then thought that, in a way, we kind of thought that returning maybe to a historical moment when something like this happened, which is a little, still things happen, but it's a little bit safer, let's say, that we could talk about what is happening today by looking at something that happened in 1985, because in a way, all of those things are constantly returning, and especially today with the, that happened during the first Marcos dictatorship. We're currently living through a second Marcos regime. I think the way that history is returning is something that's very urgent for Filipinos to be thinking and talking about, and a lot of Filipinos are, thankfully. But so we in a way, this show, it's about, it's about a historical event, but I think more than that, it's really about a present situation that has not changed. And when you look at the film and hear the testimonial, we'll talk a bit more about it later, but you'll see even the demands of the people who were protesting at that time are the same demands that people are calling for today in terms of higher wages, like lower land reform first and foremost. All of the calls are the same. So the situation really hasn't changed. But so Escalante, it became kind of a symbol of all sorts of things about how history is repeating itself. And so
It's something about that distance as well that kind of allows you to sort of engage with such a sensitive and difficult subject, to think about the present. And maybe could you talk a bit more about film as well, because it really forms the basis of the crux of the exhibition, and why the medium of film to capture this as well. Maybe could you talk about exactly the structure of this and for the audience, what they all kind of see.
Probably an entry point of like really talk about this experimental documentary film, like before maybe Amy or Enzo are introducing more about this process of shooting, like with the witnesses or survivors from the Escalante massacre. Actually, like maybe most of you haven't seen the film yet, but like I would say, like once people are talking about documentary film, very often people would think it is a bunch of archival records or like photograph or like quotes coming out from the past. But actually, in the film itself, in the making, actually the artists deliberately use like the landscape of the present, and like there are a lot of the phytogram kind of scene in this. So maybe you can introduce those part in the making process.
Yeah, to continue from that intro, I guess maybe we could break it down into like these three elements. The base of the film is really these testimonials that we recorded from survivors of the Escalante massacre. And they were really, it was an intense process, I think, gaining people's trust, having these kinds of conversations that are, really heavy and really, and also controversial, and also sort of to create the right sort of safety encasement around them, and their exhibition. So we started thinking about, also kind of how to make a film. We keep calling it an experimental documentary because I think testimony and witnessing and evidence is like really, really important to this work, but we're also like trying to think kind of beyond the conventions of people's expectations around receiving this type of historical trauma, and that's how we came to the second element, which is the phytograms. And phytograms are basically a process on 16 millimeter where you can take just like plants and dip it in a very like simple chemical solution, and it activates the chemicals inherent in the plants to process the film emulsion. So it's kind of, you'll see it later in the film. It like creates this really spectral imprint that that kind of like runs along the whole length of the film, and so when it kind of runs through the machine, it becomes this really like quick moving, abstract, very like meditative kind of like physically, very physical kind of patterning. It's definitely influenced by more experimental like structural film, which we've always had a lot of interest in, but which we've always felt like was kind of kind of lacking certain relations to the social world. We always love that idea of what experimental film can really do to your body and how it can change your perception. And then, yeah, so we started thinking about the combination of these two elements, as in like how to prepare your body to receive a certain kind of witnessing historical narrative. And then the third element, sorry, it's probably going over time, but
I think it's the most important part of it as well. That
Okay.
it's the engagement, like with the group of like reenactment.
Yeah. The third part was actually much more unplanned in a certain way. We decided to spend this time around when we were preparing for the exhibition, we decided to spend like maybe 4 or 5 months like researching and learning from Negros, and we ended up living in a small coastal village. We kind of had a feeling, I think we had a feeling that this type of community interaction would be really important for the work, beyond the kinds of like organizations and stuff that we were also attending to. And then almost immediately we were befriended by this gang of children who were our neighbors, mostly the kids of local fisher folk in the village, and we started doing workshops with them. We were making paper together and like running around and foraging things from the land and doing all kinds of like theater workshops as well. And I think in this process of sort of like learning from each other and also kind of like learning like about really deeply about the community, like through their perspectives and then later like parents and other people in the community. I think it built a certain amount of trust, so that when we started thinking about involving them in this film, the families and the kids were really game, and so we sort of in a kind of tradition of people's theater, which is widely practiced on the island. We created a scene where a procession, which took place in the last Escalante anniversary, in a kind of I would say it's like almost like a hidden, or like a sheltered. It was like a sheltered event in the local church of Escalante, because at that time the military had already co-opted the official Escalante massacre memorial, and this survivor group who we worked with had to sort of bring their own commemoration ceremony into the shelter of the church, and Enzo was able to witness that and see that like they had staged this like incredible procession, like a kind of Catholic folk procession, but with each sector that had participated in the Escalante People's Strike represented through these very clear symbols. Like in this protest that had happened that resulted in the massacre, there were like fisher folk, students, professionals, and of course sugar workers and peasant farmers represented, and they were very like just like beautifully represented with these kind of like folk symbols. And so we decided to recreate that scene with the kids in a cemetery where the youngest victim of the massacre was buried. Her name was Robena Franco, and she was 14 years old when she died, which is also the same age as the oldest child viewer who is part of our group. So this yeah, and it was, yeah, the serendipity of everything was really incredible because the cemetery was also this like people's cemetery just down the road from the village where everyone was living, and it was set in the middle of a plantation, a private plantation, as are a lot of people's cemeteries in the region actually. And the other incredible thing about this cemetery was that it was this, it was almost like a place of ecological refuge from the destructive forces of the plantation system. There were, yeah, I think like it was almost like these gravestones were sort of harboring this like beautiful and diverse plant and animal life, like really old trees, and yeah, it was just like this very biodiverse place, and the kids were also so comfortable because like, everyone they know is buried there, and there's a kind of culture around death, which I think becomes a refuge for the living. So yeah, you'll see in the film this procession that's also an educational event for the community we were working with get played out in the film.
Thanks for like really diving into the film and divide into these like three main components for us. Like, and I hope like everyone will like get a chance to see it like really in full length because it is really an incredible work. And but including in the exhibition, actually there are other bodies of work which is like very mixed media and multi like disciplinary as well, and which includes some handmade paperwork, drawings on handmade paperwork, and a light installation made from onion skin, and also a 16 millimeters animation film as well. And actually across all these media, like it is the materiality that across these like different medium, actually it is so connected back to the land and the plants and the flora of the Negros, and like even in the film itself as well. So like I would like to maybe ask a little bit more about like how do you try to connect all these in these like multi-discipline kind of work together and put them together.
Sure. Yeah, I think what you're saying was exactly right, Celia. In a way, the story of Escalante, a story of a massacre, we also think of as being part of the story of the land in Negros, but also the Philippines more generally. And you'll hear that in the open. If you all get a chance, I would suggest to try, if you can, to watch the film from the beginning. We're trying to encourage that over the run of the show, that it's going to play on the hour. So if you don't get to see the film tonight, I would recommend trying to come back to see it on an hour, like 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock. But we're trying to start the film every time on the hour. It's about 56 minutes. And it's, I think in a way our preferred viewing is to really watch it from the beginning if you're able. But you'll see that the first scene of the film, which is the landscape shot and the interview that we paired with it, that opens the film, is from a journalist actually, but he's just narrating the beginnings of the plantation system in Negros. And he talks about how it actually started with a lumber company that had to cut down all of the trees on the island, and how this paved the way for the planting of sugarcane. And then he uses, and this wasn't staged at all, but when we interviewed this journalist, he kept saying it was a massacre of the environment, it was a massacre of the jungle. And somehow just the use of that word for us was really, obviously very meaningful. So we were really trying to place this story of Escalante really as part of a longer history and a longer story of the land and what has happened to the land, the natural environment. So for us, this has been a kind of running theme that these political histories and natural histories are inseparable, and they're in a way one intertwined story. So as we've been doing this research around the political and economic structure of the plantation, it made a lot of sense to us to use really natural materials and to really think through natural materials as a way to connect to the physicality of the land, what is able to grow there, what people eat when they're there. So a lot of the materials in the show really come from plant life. So in some cases, it's basically just food scraps or plants that you go. There's like malunga. I mean, Filipinos will maybe recognize some of the plants when they see them, but there's lemongrass, there's moringa leaves, there's water spinach, so on. Also sugarcane fibers, of course. And so I think the way we think through the logic of how we're using them, particularly I would say in the the animation, the installation, and the handmade drawing, but it's really, we've been thinking a lot about the logic of compost and this kind of the metaphor of composting, and what it means to take, the onion skins that you would throw away after a meal and to kind of transform that into something else. I think transformation is a kind of running theme through the entire exhibition, I would say. On many levels, what it means and how to produce genuine transformation. And so I think when we think through how we use materials, whether it's onion skin or lemongrass or whatever, sugarcane fibers, to kind of put it through this process. And so in the case of making paper, it's about you have to pulp up this plant fiber so that it softens, and then that allows it to bind into a kind of paper structure. But for us, it was almost like a kind of composting of the material, because a lot of it is really just food scraps, and then you process it in a certain way, and then that kind of lays the foundation for to build something else, which in this case is an image. But if you think about it metaphorically, I think we think about how to build something else from in a way, the debris of the broken system that we're living, the world as it is, let's say. So taking the kind of, the debris of that, or the leftovers of that, and to try to create a new ground. I mean, we always use this reference of the ground, and of course in image, that's literally the ground of the image, to sort of rebuild the ground in order for something else to form. So I would say that was kind of the logic of the drawing, has been the logic of the drawings for sure, because that's something we've been doing continuously for a while now, for some years, these handmade paper drawings. And for the animation, it was a really similar process, because the animation basically is the same process as the drawing. So when you'll see this is a 16mm animation by the entrance, but it was basically made by using the same kind of pulped vegetal material, compost material that we use for making the paper, but instead of flattening and drying it, we kind of kept it wet, and it was basically made with an animation table where you take a picture. So it was almost like we made basically 600 drawings one by one and photographed each one in order to create the animation. So it was a very, very painfully laborious process for what ended up being essentially a 51-second film, looping
but
film.
Fun and collaborative.
But fun and collaborative, and it gives you time to really think through what you're doing. And we were reading to each other as we were making the animation, reading books to each other while we were animating. So it also
revolutionary.
Yeah, we were reading all this political literature while we were kind of making these drawings one by one. And then you make a drawing, you take a picture, then you have to swipe it out again and make a new drawing. It's like a crazily laborious process. But I think, but we like that sense of time actually that it does, that you kind of, you spend time doing this physical thing, and then at the end there's just this magic of bringing something to life again, which is another theme I would say in the show, how to bring something to life again, how to make it active again in the present, how to take something that has been stopped or killed or lost, and how to kind of reactivate that and to kind of bring it back into motion for today.
How did you do it? So you took the picture with what?
So it's
Invented, right?
it's basic. So it was a crass animation tape. It's a 16mm machine, so a very old, also recycled machine. But it's basically
Frame by frame.
you shoot it frame by frame, and there's basically a light table that we set up, that we put a piece of glass
600
over.
frames.
It was about 600, just under 600 frames.
I
So
just don't
Okay.
such machines.
yeah, well, they used to be very common, I guess, for Disney. I mean, that used to be how you would make animations
Animation, like
initially.
that.
Yeah.
Direct.
But of course now 16mm is becoming more difficult to get the machines. They're not producing them anymore. So it's also kind of this historical. I mean, that's in a way the way that we deal with history and the present. Also that's why we wanted to use
So no mistake.
4K digital video and 16mm together to kind of collapse these different time. Yeah, your sense of time somehow.
You cannot fuck it up.
Well, we did. That's the problem. We did a few times. It's hard not to fuck up in certain ways, but then you do it
If you fuck
again.
it up, you just have to do it all over again.
The machine jammed at a certain point, so there
Yeah,
was
that's like one narrative. This was almost a different kind of traumatic event in the making of this film, but in the first round that we were producing the animate, we had worked for like 3 days like 14-hour day. It was like crazy trying to finish this film in Berlin, and then we finished the last frame. We went outside and celebrated. We're like, oh, now we just have to unload the film and take it to the lab tomorrow. And then when we tried to unload the film, we realized it had jammed, so all of the film from the 3 days of shooting just came spilling out of the camera into the light. Like gut, you know, it literally was like you'd split something open, the guts just fall onto the floor, and there's nothing you can do. So that.
I like hearing.
This gives you insight into the process. It's very, very intense.
And then all you can do is just like, well, that's really shitty. Try to figure out what the problem was, and then start again, you know, and then do the whole thing again.
So you never considered this doing digital first? This would be too easy.
I mean, for one, I think we like the there is something about the character of 16mm that we really wanted, and especially for this presentation, that you can really see how, you know, there's something very demystified about film, where you can just see, oh, there's like a plastic thing with a picture and then a light, you know, almost like the onion skin, which is essentially just a homemade projector that we kind of learned how to make out of like a YouTube tutorial. But it was, you know, this being able to see how something is made, I think, is something we're really interested in, so that it doesn't become this kind of mystic magic. I mean, even though the effect might be, I mean, we hope, you know, in the onion skin light, for example, there's something kind of transcendent or spirit or, you know, meditative about it, but it's like made in this really simple, basic way, and you can really see how the light goes through the magnifying glass, reflects off. It's like very material, you know, it's like a kind of materialist.
I think we like that
understanding.
materiality of film and the way it kind of reflects the paper making process, and yeah, it's not like we're film theorists. And of course this is very pragmatic advice, and I can also think about it for future works, but there's there's something alchemical and like, yeah, I guess you just say we're demystifying the process, but it's also magical, and like it's like light based in a way that is rendered understandable to us and others.
I think it's interesting when you also describe the works on paper like almost like an animation with another temporality. It's also worth sharing maybe that this exhibition is the beginning kind of chapter, and it will travel to 3 other cities, so Berlin in spring, and so we have in the audience Nancy, who's working for CCA Berlin. Hello. And Glasgow International, and then Norma PS1, and that's going to be interesting to see how this generative approach will kind of transform and translate. Maybe that kind of maybe I can also kind of turn the conversation to the curator as well, in terms of what does it mean to bring this project to Hong Kong. And there's activations as well. There's a long-term dialogue with migrant groups and organizers here. For example, Sheila, Gabriella. You know, it's an honor to have you here as well as the audience. And this discursive dimension is also very particular.
Thanks for like mentioning it. Like, I guess like in our conversation and preparation of the show, it has been always like in the conversation about like how from the engagement with the local community and also the local kind of activists and also group of like collective that you have been learning from in the Philippines, how to actually engage them throughout the different kind of chapters in the upcoming exhibition presentation as well, that we don't see this as, for example, a project, or we don't see it as an exhibition only facing kind of opportunity, but actually the context of like these labor issues or these suppression and all these like challenges about land reform and all this discussion, how it could connect to the local kind of struggle that we are facing at the moment, and some things that maybe it cannot be said directly or openly like in Hong Kong, but at the same time like learning through these contexts and then really in the discussion with different local kind of communities and organizers, like how to unpack it in the local context as well. That is something that we really want to do through the public programming and other engagement throughout the exhibition as well. And for example, like the Saka collective, that you learn about the bunkerland kind of site of occupying land use in order to really sustain themselves. Like there are various, I would say, episodes in Hong Kong about new infrastructure coming in and people need to force to leave their own kind of homeland or their own kind of belonging kind of region, and the relocation, this dislocation, this like loss, like how do we come together to reflect on it and also support each other on it. And that's why through the engagement also with the migrant group of workers in Hong Kong as well, like these migration because of the economic situation and condition in their home country. Like we don't want to just focus on like is the labor right issue in Hong Kong for them, but actually it is rooted back to like why they are forced to leave their country. It is something that we want to go back to the root cause of things, and that's why we keep on saying that it is an ongoing struggle, ongoing conversation, ongoing learning process across these different parties in order for us to know what we can do together through an art program, or like with the institution, maybe support, no matter in programming wise or like in outreach wise or in conversation wise, how do we unpack these and make connection for cross-border connection as well.
Yeah, it makes me think about this being a particular time in the world where like in order to affect change in one location, actually so much organizing has to happen outside of that location. I mean, we see it for Philippines, Palestine, so many struggles, like we really rely on this broader network, and so I think it's been especially rich being able to spend time in Hong Kong and to be able, I don't know, like, yeah, to connect to social movements that can't be talked about here with social movements that can't be talked about there but can be talked about here. There's something that feels like we're kind of in a big social experiment together. Yeah.
And also maybe Enzo, you could talk about your activism as well, the group that you were involved with in Berlin, and I think that might be an interesting kind of activation as well in Berlin when the project moves to there. And yeah.
Sure. On top, as well as being an artist, I'm also an activist and organizer in Berlin. I work with a collective, or was a founding member of a collective, Alpas Filipinas, that focuses on organizing the Filipino diaspora community there in Berlin. We're a relatively recent group. It started about 2 years ago now, but it's really built up into something that we feel in terms of the direction in the conversation in Berlin has been very meaningful, because there was a very, there really wasn't much of a conversation around issues of the Philippines and directly addressing the Filipino community there until quite recently. And so we found that we've really been that there was a real desire and a need to have a political, like an explicitly political organization for Filipinos living in Berlin. And so we're really trying to, that's our primary agenda. It's to organize Filipinos there and to connect them to the mass movement back in the Philippines. So it's always, I think Filipino, we're part of the Bayan Alliance, so we're also part of a broader network of progressive Filipino organizations that operate, that center in the Philippines, but operate globally, of course, because of because people have been forced to migrate. So I think for us, it's also really meaningful to be able to connect, for example, to organizations like Gabriela, the Bayan chapter here, Mission for Migrants, the Hong Kong Campaign for the Advancement of Peace and Human Rights in the Philippines, and all of these associated Filipino activist organizations, because this is really one of the quite, I would say, special things about the Filipino movement, is that it's a very broad network, including an intersectional and multi-sectoral network, including women's organizations, peasant federations, labor unions, queer organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, associations for artists, lawyers, scientists, but all uniting around the common progressive program. So we're trying also, I think, with the show to see how we can kind of network between these different venues where the show will happen, and how we can kind of sort of also strengthen the networks around different organizations. So in Berlin, I think, our collective will be much more active in the programming for the Berlin iteration. And,
just to follow that as well, the mantra for us is that an exhibition is not just about showcasing, per se, but also it's this medium that can be intersectional. Maybe this is a good moment to kind of promote the next event, the mutual aid as well.
So, as we mentioned, like through the exhibition, of course, we would like to do through different strand of public programming to engage with local kind of collectives and migrant workers and other walks of life of people to talk about this topic. And so at the same time, we would like to take this opportunity to build solidarity kind of support and understanding about the situation in the Philippines as well. So like in the early November time, on the 4th of November, we will do a mutual fundraising event at Eaton Hotel, and then through the mutual fundraising event, we invited representative from the Saka Collective, which is an artist alliance who comes together to support the agrarian kind of reform and struggle in the Philippines. And the representative will talk more about the current challenges and reform happening in the Philippines, and also in conversation with the local representative to talk about these struggles together. And also, it is a fun event to raise funds to support the group of mothers and
mothers and relatives against tyranny and repression.
Yes,
Martyrs.
yes. I'll try to remember next time. So it is a group of survivors and relatives really suffer from the massacre event, and we really hope
The other group we worked most closely with in the film.
Yeah, and that's why we wanted to see how cross-borderly we build up this solidarity and understanding about these contexts.
And I think that's a way not to just take images from over there and then bring it here as a platform, but this idea of a generative approach as well on multiple fronts. And we're thinking about this kind of support. Maybe it's a good moment for a few questions to open up to the floor.
Yes, definitely. And thanks to thanks everyone to come to the opening. And I was wondering, is there any maybe question that the audience have throughout the talk so far? Or let's enjoy the opening. Okay, before actually we really end this conversation, I just want to say another thank you to all the collaborators who are involved in this exhibition, not just the migrant communities from Gabriela, Hong Kong Corp, and all the union representatives, and also some local collectives working closely with us as well, like Wallbean, so he's here, and who really did where's the catalog? Okay, grab one catalog when you're at the reception that has been beautifully designed and printed with risograph process. I guess there are too many things to unpack in one talk.
Maybe an essay.
but yeah, please join us into this kind of join force in making it a better world together. I would say really yes. So thank you everyone for joining and enjoy the opening and see the film, remember.